Wax on, wax off. Don't forget to breathe. Very important.
Relax. It's time to expand your horizons. My name is Jake, and this is the Photoshop and Illustrator Unleashed podcast.
If you're anything like I was, you're probably a little hesitant to start drawing. You're not too sure of your drawing ability, you're not that eager to show your drawings to anyone else, and you might not think there are that many benefits to sketching when you're designing something. Well, for today's podcast, I talked to Steve Savalle, who's a 2D and 3D animator as well as designer and phenomenal illustrator. He's been drawing ever since he was a kid and working as an animator for years. So I was extremely excited to have the opportunity to get to ask him about how he uses drawing in his design process when it comes to motion design. Steve is also amazingly talented at making photorealistic pencil drawings. So I also picked his brain about that entire process and how he even got into it. So sit back and I hope you enjoy this conversation with Steve. All right, Steve, thank you so much for talking to our students here on our podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot for having me.
But first, why don't we just have you talk a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what kind of stuff you do?
Oh, absolutely, man. So first off, I hate talking about myself. I think that's probably harder than anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
But a little bit about me is I am from the Detroit area. I'm about 10 minutes north of Detroit. And I'm a freelance animator, designer. I also teach for a living. I teach illustration, animation as well. And I keep busy in teaching CrossFit and endurance athletes as well.
Oh, very nice.
Yeah, so I got my hands pretty full.
Yeah, sounds like it. So were you like always a freelancer, or did you work full time anywhere before becoming freelance? Or
No, so my career started, I'd say almost about 10 years ago. And I started going to school at a local community college around here. And the cool part was after I'd finished college, I ended up actually teaching an animation course there. So it was kind of fun to see how everything went full circle.
Nice.
And I had met some great students. And I mean, it was a lot of fun. But so I had started at this local college. And then because, I hate to throw my mom on blast on a podcast, but she convinced me to go to this really expensive local school. And I was like, all right, fine. Because at this point I was going for illustration because I was like, I don't care about computers. I just want to draw for a living. And I went to this really expensive art school and coincidentally, they told me I wasn't good enough.
Wow.
And they said, hey, we don't really care for your work. We don't think you really have the chops, but, if you hang out with us, we'll help get you there. And that kind of took me by surprise. I was like, all right, that humbled me in a way, and I think in a good way. But after a few months, I realized that place wasn't really for me. So I had gone back to the community college because at that point I was like, you know what? I don't want to starve for the rest of my life. I'd like to actually make some money. So I think I'm going to kind of get into animation. Like this stuff looks fun. That was back when, right before the first Transformers came out. I think Cloverfield had just come out a little bit after that as well. And I was like, that stuff looks great. Then I had started back in the local college around here, and it was cool. I got more into animation. I was obsessed with it. I was working nonstop trying to get better at it. And on top of it, I was working full time. I was working 40, 50-hour weeks. I had multiple jobs just to pay the bills and to pay off college as well. So I would have nights where I was up till 3, 4, 5 in the morning. I mean, I brought it up before to a couple of people, but I love Facebook for the on this days. And it reminds you like 10 years ago, you were doing this. Well, Facebook wasn't what it was now, but like I'd see 10 years ago, I'm up at 3 in the morning posting some stupid stuff talking about how I'm learning how to do color correction, or, oh man, I just finally figured out the graph editor. So it's kind of, it's fun to see. It makes you feel a little good. But so there was a lot of work that went into it on my side. So after that, I had got lucky enough to get into a studio called Ringside Creative, which was a little bit larger of a studio for the area. And I had no idea what I was doing. I don't even know why they hired me. You look at my first reel and you're just like, that was really, really bad. Like I barely even understood the graph editor. And look at everything now. Like in my opinion, if you don't understand the graph editor, nobody's ever going to hire you. Because that's where you bring everything to life. So I had a mentor there named Jason Roller, and he kind of just took me under his wing and helped me out and really was invested in making sure that I created good work and got better, because that helps everybody out. I mean, it made his life easier. It's great that I'm able to start catching on to things a little bit more. So I'd stayed there for about 3.5 years, and then moved over to a smaller shop because I was like, I want to try something new, man. Maybe a small team would be great. And I was kind of a team of one-ish, and I didn't really enjoy that. There wasn't that camaraderie. There wasn't that fun community with it for me at that time. And that's what I was really drawn to. So I went to a shop called Pluto at that point and had what I will say to date one of the best bosses I ever had there. He was really smart. He understood things and understood how to get you to be better at it and let you kind of make your own mistakes and learn on your own path. So hung out there for, I don't know, about 3-ish years as well, and then took a spot as a senior art director. So my career has kind of gone all over the place. And at that point, I was at a much larger scale studio, but it wasn't necessarily one that I had passion for. So at that point, I was like, well, I'm not really digging the work that I'm being a part of. I mean, there's some great artists here, but maybe freelance is going to be the way for me to go. So about 1.5 years ago, I finally went freelance. And since then, it's been amazing. I've got to team up. I mean, right out the gate, Yeah House really helped. I mean, I teamed up with them and created some great work that really kind of helped jumpstart the freelance world for me. Teamed up with Gunnar on some stuff. I've been with Oddfellows almost this whole year, and they are a great group of people over there. So yeah, that's kind of the route my career's gone.
That's awesome, man. You're serious dedication there with like all of those late nights and working, into the hours of the morning. I know exactly how that feels. But man, like that's such an amazing storyline, like that you just laid out, because you went from like feeling like you knew what you were doing, being told you really didn't know what you were doing, to now you're working with these studios like Oddfellows and Gunnar that are just constantly putting out amazing work, which, by the way, for our students, if you don't know these studios, we're going to link to these in the show notes so you can go explore. And we'll link to Steve's website too, where you can see the exact projects he's worked on. But just some amazing, amazing work coming out of these studios that you're getting to work with now. That's totally amazing.
Oh, it's fun because you always strive for, at least I do, mentally, nothing's ever enough. Like, even if I get there, I'm like, all right, cool, I'm here. Now I have to work harder. Like, it's always that trying to bridge that gap, no matter what stage I've ever been at my career. So even at this point, it was actually, for me, more stressful working with some of these studios than early on in my career, because once you're working with some of these people that you look up to, you're like, I have to be the best that I've ever been, plus so much better than I've ever been. And then you hit a point where you're like, I also need to accept that I'm here for a reason, trust myself, and then work together as a team and know that the best work's going to come out of it.
So I have a question then. You mentioned that you wanted to be an illustrator in the beginning,
yes,
and then you got into animation. So what are you doing today, like on any given project? Are you sticking to just animation, or do you still do illustration? Like what kind of stuff are you actually specializing in?
So this year I have been very heavy in illustration and animation. And when I say illustration, I mean pencil drawing.
Okay.
Not necessarily like... In working with Oddfellows, they have some of the greatest designers. Some of the work that Sarah does is just mind-blowing. So you almost feel like you're cheating. Same with Michelle over at Yeah House. Like, she would send me over these designs, and I would be like, all I have to do is not mess this up. Like, this is amazing. So I've learned a lot from them. But this year has been more on the early on sketching, the concepting, the storyboards, and then a lot of bringing it to life.
That's something that we're trying to encourage our students to learn too, is how just sketching, like you don't have to be an amazing pencil artist, illustrator to be able to take advantage of what sketching can do for your actual design. So when did you actually start drawing then? Like at what age? Were you always interested in it, or how did you get into it?
Oh man, I am just like every other kid, I think. I think every kid grows up, and I mean, you said you have a little one. It's just, you see them drawing and you're like, that's fun. Like you start to see how it comes to life. And when I was younger, I loved drawing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I can remember that to this day. And I just started drawing, and it got to the point where I drew so much when I was younger that when I'd get in trouble, which happened often, I would actually get grounded from drawing.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also old, so it was different back then, probably. But to the point where like my mom caught me ripping pages out of books so I could draw on them because they took the paper away from me. So yeah, I got in big trouble for that one too. But yeah, so I've been drawing pretty much my whole life.
Yeah, so I have a similar start to drawing. Where as a kid, I just wanted to do it and I didn't really care how it looked. I just enjoyed doing it. But as I got a little bit older, I kind of developed this sense of like realizing that I wasn't good. And I would get frustrated quickly that what I had in my head wasn't getting on the paper. And so I kind of drifted away from that as I got into like grade school and high school. But I'd love to pick your brain then about how, because I'm assuming that some of, if not all of our students are probably in the same boat as me, where drawing just isn't something that came naturally. So how did you start to get better as an artist? Like you were drawing all the time. Was it just practice, or were you doing things like reading books on how to be a better artist by hand? Like what kind of steps did you take early on?
There was a lot of practice. And I think practice is the cliche answer that everybody feels they have to say, because obviously it's true. You trade the hours for the talent. I think something that everybody needs to know right off the gate, and I tell people this, and people have a natural, they want to be combative or they don't want to believe it, but it's true, is you have two types of people. You have those who can draw and you have those who haven't practiced drawing. Now, it's easy to look at the work that I do and be like, oh man, like I could never be as good as him, or hell, I hope you guys are better than me. Like I really do, because that's fun. Like that makes it more, I don't want to say healthy, competitive. But it's easy to not take into consideration. Last year, for example, I clocked in about 330 hours of illustration just on the photorealistic illustrations. Well, If you put 330 hours into anything, you're going to get better at it. So I don't think it necessarily is a natural talent or something that people are naturally good at, because the more you enjoy something, the more you're going to work at it, and you don't see it as a burden. You don't see it as, hey, this is a tough road. You see it as, hey, this is cool. I'm really enjoying myself. So I think it's really important to know right out the gate that it is practice. You are going to put that time into it to get better, and you do that by studying. You do that by looking at what is light, what is shape, how are different types of shading going to work, whether it be really soft and smooth or whether you do cross-hatching, or what's going to be the best look for what I'm trying to accomplish. A lot of the things that I say to people, whether it be animation or illustration, I think it all stems to one main core thing, is having a strong mindset. If you get into it and you're like, I'm bad at this, well, you've already defeated yourself. You've already told yourself, well, I can't be good at drawing because I'm bad at drawing. Or you could look at it of the perspective of, hey, I'm bad at drawing. Well, yeah, everybody's bad at drawing before they start drawing. That's okay. Oh, all right, great. Well, this is going to be bad for a while, and I'm going to slowly start to enjoy myself, and things are going to click.
And that really goes for anything, too. I felt the same way when I started becoming an animator. I kind of differentiate knowing After Effects and being an animator, because there was kind of a moment in my career where I realized that the work I was doing didn't look like the work that I was admiring, and I didn't know why. And so it took a few years, and School of Motion was a huge part of how I became a better animator. But I learned the angle that I was approaching my animations from was all wrong, because I was thinking so technically. Yes. And I had a lot to learn about actual the way things move and how to get the types of motion I wanted to appear on my screen.
Oh yeah, because anybody can set a couple keyframes. It's what you do in between those keyframes and how you pull the graph editor and your speed and sense of timing and that exaggeration and those push and pulls. That's what's entertaining, getting that feeling out of it.
And by the way, for our students who probably don't know what we're talking about when we're saying graph editor and all of these terms for After Effects, this is all stuff that you will learn in Animation Bootcamp if you decide to go take that course, which is the course that completely changed my motion design career So
every course that you guys do is amazing. To give a quick rundown on Graph Editor, like a 10-second spiel, if you go on a roller coaster and everything's nice and smooth, you're going to enjoy yourself. If you go on a roller coaster line and those lines aren't smooth, you're probably going to die and it's going to be violence and a crash. Graph Editor works the same way. Keep the lines nice and smooth, everybody's happy. Make the lines all kind of janky, it's not going to be a fun ride.
That is an amazing analogy. I love that.
I drink a lot of coffee. These things kind of come to me.
Awesome. Okay, well, coming back to illustrating then, like how does drawing play a role in your work today? And why do you think that's actually important in your workflow?
So drawing for me is extremely crucial. And anytime I see people who at least have a strong understanding of drawing in the beginning, it makes me really excited. So right out the gate, imagine trying to understand somebody who speaks a different language. You would use Google Translator or something of that nature to bridge that gap. Drawing is like a translator from your brain to the world and everybody you're trying to talk to. So when you sit down with an idea, I mean, I could sit there and explain to you what I see, but that's going to go just as well as trying to explain somebody the dream that you had last night. You're going to get about 5 seconds into trying to explain and be like, you know what, it's better that I probably just don't talk anymore. So I think drawing can actually kind of help bridge that gap really early on and really kind of convey this sense of excitement with the people you're working with on a project. And it can kind of give you your idea legs to stand on early on. You can see whether it's going to go down the right path or whether it's going down the wrong path. If you're in a group setting, people can start having ideas and spitting, let's try this, let's do this, angling things a certain way. You can save yourself a lot of time and hassle if you spend more time drawing and talking through stuff in the very beginning versus trying to rush it or trying to jump right into Photoshop and trying to animate something before you've even sold a concept or an idea. I think it's that way of almost a checks and balance to where it keeps things in line in a positive way.
That makes a lot of sense. So you're thinking of drawing as kind of a way to just almost brainstorm, as a way to, like, it sounds like you're trying to get your ideas out as quickly as possible so that you can start to actually see it on that paper. Is that right?
That's absolutely right. Because what a lot of people tend to do, and I've seen this over the years and years of teaching, animating myself, is they tend to jump to their machine to be that crutch. And I think that if you can shut your monitor down or close yourself off from the internet and really sketch and talk and draw, then you're going to come up with something more pure versus if you're sitting there staring at stuff, trying to find that inspiration online. Well, essentially all you're kind of doing is, okay, what can I recreate? What can I look at and then twist into my own way? And I mean, when it comes down to it, that's all everything is to an extent. But if you can just shut the world down for a little bit, I notice that your brain will go into places that is far more creative than the first few things that will come to mind.
So when you're sketching out something like that early on in the production of any video, are your sketches, like, are you trying to make them extremely clean and detailed? Like, I mean, not necessarily your photo real illustrations, but like, how messy are you being with these?
Oh, I love this question because I think it's so important too. And I am very messy. In the very beginning, I'm not even worried. Sometimes I may actually talk through the scribble of lines that you're looking at, but I'm building the world in my head and I'm talking through it out loud. So the people seeing it or that I'm talking to while working on stuff are also starting to paint this picture as well and mold it. And then once we know that, hey, that's a good path, or we've decide, hey, that's not a good path, we can move forward from that point. So the early on sketches will be pretty bad. And then once I get into storyboarding phase, they're not polished to the photorealism level that you see. I care about composition a little bit more. I care about framing, size. If I have to draw stuff if there's depth and Z-space, things that go back far, I want to make sure that my perspective lines are on point. If I have light sources, I want to kind of just roughly show that. It doesn't need to be crazy, but if I can at least show what side's in shadow, then I can quickly illustrate a mood in these storyboards as well, elevating it that much more. I think good quality sketches and drawings in the very beginning is one of those things that if people see it, they appreciate it and they trust the process more. right out the gate. If they don't see it, I feel like there's still this uncertainty from a client aspect and is, hey, maybe I should be more hands-on because I'm not sure I can trust them to get to this finish line.
That's awesome and really encouraging to hear that. Like, it sounds like even at these bigger studios like Yeah House and Oddfellows, they're okay with those messy initial sketches, and because they understand the artists, look, they are artists themselves, but they understand that this is not going to be a final representation of what you're making. It's kind of like the initial roadmap or framework of what you're trying to build on paper.
And I don't think and I would just want to say this one thing to everybody who's listening, is there is a line in the sand on this one. You wouldn't necessarily want to show certain clients your really messy sketches, because you can't expect or hope that they are also visual people that can understand this. I see a lot of debates online of people who are so angry at clients who, they just don't understand my vision, or they just can't see it, or, well, they're not supposed to. If they were able to see it, or if they were able to understand it, odds are favorable they might be able to create it themselves, and you lose value. So I wouldn't know how to build a car, but I can definitely draw some stuff up on how to animate a car driving down a road. It kind of falls in line with that.
So I want to talk a little bit more about this process then, just so we can kind of give our students a clear explanation of how this all plays out. So your initial sketches are pretty messy. It's just trying to get ideas out. You're talking out loud, getting everybody on the same page, and then maybe you're gonna make some tweaks on what your story looks like based on these frames, and then reiterate on it and maybe clean it up. At what point would you be finished with drawing and transfer it into, say, Photoshop or Illustrator?
Once everybody signs off on the story and the overall look of everything, that's usually when I'd move into Photoshop and Illustrator. Now, I would take those storyboards or those drawings and I would do what's called a rough animatic. I would drop them in just still pictures and edit them in a way that I'm watching this and understanding a sense of pacing and timing. Now, with illustration of just drawing one thing, or if you're just worried about graphic design or your one frame, I mean, you can get away with not doing this, but in the world of animation or telling stories, the more you can understand your sense of timing of how long things are going to be up on screen for and the framing, you can start to see your story come together. So there's a lot of times where even in teaching, I'll see a lot of people draw from their perspective and how they see the world. So you see a lot of mid shots. You see a lot of shots from if the camera is 5 to 6 feet off the ground. Well, once you place that in an animatic, you can see, all right, well, this is becoming repeated. I'm able to see a pattern, and I think we need more variation. So then you can start quickly sketching up other ideas and dropping them into play there. And you see how that story becomes better, how more life is brought to it. And I think you get a sense of maturity out of it at that point. So then once you feel good about everything and how it's all playing out at that point, that's where I'll start taking my sketches into Illustrator and going right over my sketches, or into Photoshop and going right over my sketches.
Okay, cool. And our students have even had a little bit of experience with that at this point, where they've traced rough sketches. So that's great to know kind of where that falls in the production process. So as a motion designer, though, if our students want to get into motion design, do you think that having drawing ability is kind of essential? Like how good do you think somebody should be at drawing for it to be useful as a motion designer?
I think in our industry, and this is subjective, this is solely my opinion and my stance on it, I think there's a big acceptance to not being able to draw or be good at drawing, because a lot of folks don't put the work in. So you get a ton of, and I'm not saying everybody, please, there are some amazing illustrators in this industry. If there wasn't, we wouldn't be inspired looking at all of this work. But I think people early on very much say, oh, I'm not good at drawing, so I'm just not going to worry about that. And people will say, oh, that's fine, just kind of create more. I think that can hinder you really early on. And like we said and kind of talked about earlier, if you can even just show, hey, I understand depth, I understand perspective, I understand scale, foreshortening, which is my hand is smaller than my face. But if I hold my hand right at the camera, my hand's bigger than my face. And that's what foreshortening is. If you can convey those small things early on in the sketch phase, I think you're going to build more trust and sell the idea easier to your team.
That makes total sense. And I would even say in my own experience that I can relate to that because in my first job, I played many roles. Like I was brought on as a motion designer, but then my employer found out I knew how to edit. And then they found out that I knew how to design. So I made myself more valuable to my employer because I had a handful of skills. And just like you said, if you're able to communicate through your drawings that you know and understand all of these principles, that will just make you so much more valuable as an artist.
Oh, I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about your creative process. Where do you start when you come up with ideas? You're usually, given a script or an idea from the client of what they're trying to accomplish, but then how do you come up with ideas on how to communicate that visually?
Oh man, this one's tough because I think everybody's a little bit different, and I want everybody to know who's new to this that there's not one way. So it is this gray area of I'm going to start here and then let's just see where this path takes me. And to be more specific about that is the first thing I get or would look at when I get a script is what's the brand. If I'm doing stuff for CrossFit, well, I know kind of the look that I need to go for. If I'm doing stuff for college football, we did some stuff a little while ago with that. Well, I know the type of look I have to go for. So I already kind of have an idea of how to take that story. Or if it's more of an explainer video, I mean, some of those have a certain set look and style that kind of works. But again, if you understand the brand, you know what they're going to do, what they're not going to do. Google has 4 colors that you're going to be allowed to use for the most part, and you work within that palette. So now knowing your style or your look or your color palettes or the type of work that brand creates can kind of help drive you into a direction of knowing, hey, this is what it's going to look like. The other thing that isn't as fun to talk about, but it's very important, is the business side of it. You also have to look at the budget that they're working with. So I can come up with all the ideas in the world of this crazy, very in-depth, tons of cell animation, which is drawing frame by frame, or a lot of the high-end 3D work and particles. But if the budget can only cover the costs to keep people and lights on for a week or two, I may have to tailor that back. So before I've even started drawing or coming up with the idea, I try to do my homework as much as possible on those 2 things. Once I'm there and feel comfortable that I have a good understanding of that, and if I don't have a good understanding of that, I ask questions. Early on in this stage, clients usually love to talk because you're trying to bring their idea to life. So it's a fun process at this point. Nobody feels hindered. Nobody feels like there's this weight all on their shoulders. So ask the questions in a fun way. Make it more this back and forth. Build it into something where you and the client are connected early on versus just trying to take it and make something of your own. So all that said, I like to then know kind of what's going on, and I'll get into my sketch phase at that point. I'll start drawing and kind of coming up with, if I'm looking at a script, I will take one little section and say, all right, cool, this is kind of what I think is going to go on here. And I know that the first 2-3 ideas that I come up with are the exact same, roughly first 2-3 ideas everybody's going to come with. So then I'm like, all right, so what can I do here? Let's throw a dog into the story just because my dog just walked by right now. So then you're like, cool, so now I got a dog. And what if, rather than just seeing this stuff straight on following a person, what if I'm following it from the dog's perspective? And then you can start to get a little weird with the story, or you can start taking the story into more of a creative way. And I will go probably per section and do 5 to 10 sketches of different ideas, or sometimes just writing down different things. I love doing word maps. And what word maps are saying, hey, here's just a whole bunch of words that kind of fill what I'm looking at for this mood or this script or this emotion or whatever it is. And then I start kind of going through that and spidering it out.
So what would you say would happen to your work if you did skip that sketching phase completely? Like if all that prep work where you kind of set rules for yourself based on the client's needs and their budget and their actual brand, what if you just went from that straight to designing in Photoshop or Illustrator? Like you didn't think about anything or take time to explore on paper. What do you think would happen?
I think I know for me that the quality of work would suffer. The overall story that I try to tell is going to feel probably rushed, a little piecemealed together because, like I had mentioned earlier, a lot of times I really, really like trying to see things in an animatic form, which is my sketches played as a video. And it gives me a sense of timing, gives me a sense of, do I have good variety? Well, if I just get right into creating, well, one, I'm not really exploring deep within this, and I'm kind of forcing myself in a container. And what I mean by that is I'm staring directly at one thing versus letting my brain create stuff. I'm letting tools drive me and my knowledge of the program hopefully push me to a finish line of something that I'm not invested in. And that's probably the biggest thing that you could take from it is, by the time you finish, no, you're not going to be proud of it, but you're not really invested because you went about something more as a technical side of it, as a operator versus really kind of diving into the creative storytelling aspect of it all.
Okay, yeah, I can totally relate to that too, because when I was early on learning these pieces of software, it was 100% technical. Like I had no experience with design or illustration or storytelling. I was just excited to be working on a computer and, having tools to let me type out text and then make them look like they were on fire or something, stupid like that. So it was exciting, but I was purely technical at that point. So do you feel like there is a point where technical education is important, or do you think that you should be just jumping straight into the whole learning about design principles and storytelling, or is it kind of a combination of those two?
I think it's a combination of both, because if you understand the technical side of it and the storytelling side of it, I think that's where your career will excel. Because you're really able to not only bring something to life, you're able to do it from conception to finish. I think there's a lot of good to be taken from people who just understand the technical side of it too, because sometimes there are people who just don't enjoy the creative side of it. They really do just like dorking out, and I say that in a positive way. They love dorking out into the program side of it. Or if you look at people who get really deep into coding or creating scripts, plugins, simulations, particles, that type of stuff, you can really, really excel the quality of a project based upon people who rely solely on the technical side of it. Now, if I look at my career and wonder, how did I get where I am today? I would say the two biggest things were the way that my mind works, though, and not on the technical side, on the storytelling side of it, and then my ability to animate. Those were the two things that really progressed my career. And the reason I say it's good to have both and you shouldn't rely on one is anybody can learn the programs and how they work. But if you learn how to address everything else that goes along with it, whether it be client relations, whether it be quality of story, whether it be understanding what you're creating this for, how to respond, how to work with a team of people, that's where you're going to really draw that line and, in my opinion, excel your career further.
Do you think then it would ever be a bad thing to really focus on both of those at once? Like if you could go back basically and do this over again when you first opened up Photoshop, do you think it would be valuable to you to approach it not only from that technical standpoint, but to also incorporate things like we were just talking about, like storytelling?
Oh, absolutely, I do. I remember the first time I opened Photoshop, I couldn't figure out if the program was broke or not because the background layer was locked and I wasn't able to do anything. Because I didn't know how. But back then, education wasn't as vast as it is now. The programs were far more limited than what you can do now, and the community was nowhere near as large as it is now. So looking back, I would love to have had what students can have now with a lot of the different avenues that you can go down. School of Motion, for example, offers a ton of beautiful stuff for you to kind of get rid of those smoke and mirrors and start to feel confident and gain an education on what it is that we do. Also, sometimes just chatting and talking with people and having the internet and being able to reach out and, hey, I did this podcast. Somebody's like, Steve, cool. Like, how did you draw that baby Groot that you did? Like, it's really simple to have access to people and ask those questions and kind of create that dialogue back and forth that wasn't necessarily a thing back then.
Right. Yeah, and I again can completely relate to that. I think we're pretty similar in age. I'm 29, and you're in your
I'm a little
early
older,
30s.
but not too much.
Yeah, so I think we came from a similar point of time of online education, and what we had then is like a completely different world compared to what is available to you now. So, like I said, I can completely relate to that, and being able to connect with people that you're like not just seeing their work, but you can instantly, tweet at them or direct message them through Instagram or something. To actually have that conversation is amazing.
Oh, yeah. And the worst case scenario is they don't respond to you. Like,
Exactly.
You have nothing to lose in reaching out to people.
So let's talk a little bit more about your illustration then. I want to get into the photoreal work, but before that, I'm just curious, do you have some kind of a drawing routine? I mean, you said you were drawing all the time as a kid. Are you still drawing just as a hobby today?
Yes. All of my photoreal illustrations I do, for the most part, for myself.
Okay.
Because I truly love it. Like, I love animating. I love designing. I love working on those projects. That's why I do that for a living. But illustrations for me is still that I am my own client. And when I feel proud of it, that's when it's done. Or if I want to draw something, I'm drawing it because I enjoy it. So it's an outlet for myself. I do have a lot of people who ask for commissions. I do have a lot of people who do hit me up to do this for them for money as well. But I'm always hesitant to take some of that stuff on, because when I'm doing something that I love like this, that I love doing for myself, when I'm doing it for somebody else, I don't feel as invested in the photorealistic illustrations, because it's a lot of time that you put into that, and you put all that time in and then you just get rid of it, and that for me is heartbreaking. Now, also know when it comes to animation and design, I'm not married to anything I do. So clients could see that and be like, let's change that red. And you're like, oh man, red, that is not a good call. So you're like, hey, maybe, how about we try this? Like, let's kind of go. And they're like, yeah, but I think we should go red. And you're like, that's a great idea. Actually, I'm so glad we're going red right now. That is the only color I wanted to make this. So There's a difference. Like, on that side, completely not married to it. My illustrations, can't break that. I'm still married to what I'm creating.
So what does the routine look like then for you? Like, are you sketching a certain amount of time per day or per week? Like, do you do drawing at the same time every day? Are you drawing in a sketchbook whenever you feel like it? Like, what kind of a routine do you have?
I'm scattered. It really comes down to how much is on my plate with animation and design first and foremost. So when I'm working on a project, that gets all of my attention. And then when that's done, I'm big into doing endurance events. So I have to dedicate a certain amount of time just to train for those. And then with the leftover time of just adulting and having a family and everything like that, I start to try to divide that up a little bit. So I do try to draw weekly. I don't carry a sketchbook, even though I'm a huge hypocrite and tell everybody that they probably should. But it's because for me, I don't know. I haven't found a way to do it that I found enjoyment out of. The photorealistic sketches, the drawings, not photorealistic sketches, but the illustrations of people is something that I really, really have just been drawn towards.
And by the way, for the students listening, check out the show notes right now. You can go to Steve's Instagram and see these drawings that we're talking about. And I'm saying Instagram because you have some of your process in there as well. So I just feel like that'd be really valuable for them to see right now.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. There's some stuff on my Instagram. There's some stuff on my website.
And we'll have both of those in the show notes for you guys. So tell me, how did you even get into this photoreal work? Like, when did you start? How did you start? Like, I don't even have the slightest idea of how you could draw something so realistic looking. So how did you get into something like this?
So early on in my career, I think this was earlier. I think this may have been late high school, early college. I really was drawn towards drawing people, because that was what I was told, and what I had started to realize was the most difficult thing to really draw. Because if you're the slightest bit off, even a hair off on the sizing of something, everything's going to look like it's falling apart. It's going to look, oh, okay, that's kind of good, but there's something visually wrong. Because we as people, our brains are wired to be able to pick up on those types of things. Our faces are essentially pretty symmetrical to an extent, and everything breaks apart almost like a grid. So I was really, really drawn towards drawing people and faces. And then I started getting into painting as well. And I had an instructor in college who told me one thing, and he said, if you can do a good illustration in black and white, then people will look at it and they can see it in color. Obviously, figuratively speaking.
Right.
But also, color will hide things. You can mess stuff up. And if you have color, the human brain will not necessarily pick up on every little minor fault. But in black and white, you're going to catch on to it right away. So I was always drawn towards that challenge. Also, let's say for what it was, I was cheap and broke, and I could afford black and white colored pencils. I couldn't necessarily afford a whole bunch of acrylic or oil paints. So that's why I never really went too far down that road early on. Then it just became this love for, all right, how do I make this better? All right, great, I did the Khaleesi drawing, and how do I take that and, what did I learn from that? How do I take that into my next drawing? So it was always this challenge of, can I make it better than the last thing that I did?
Yeah, I mean, I can see the progression of details and just even in some of the contrasts in your drawings have definitely improved. But I mean, I'm still completely dumbfounded by like how you start with this. Like, it looks like you're using photo references, right?
Yes. Oh, so here's something so everybody knows. I stress out about the photo reference more than I stress out about the actual drawing. Because for me, reference is king. Like, I am drawing somebody's exact likeness. Now, not all photos will make for good illustrations. And even some of those photos that would make for good illustrations are at such a low resolution. So you go on Google and you're looking through photos and stuff, trying to figure out what's going to make a good drawing. And I find something, but it's 400 by 300. Well, right. If I try to look at that or blow it up to see the details, because that's what really helps bring my work to life, I'm not able to pick up on it because it becomes pixelated. So then it's, all right, well, that was a great drawing, or that would have made for a great drawing, but I can't use it. So I will spend, as much as I hate to admit it, I'll spend hours trying to find the right reference, to the point where I will open up Netflix on my computer and take screenshots to try to kind of alleviate some of that.
Well, I mean, that makes sense because these drawings look like they take hours and hours and hours. So you'd want to make sure that your reference is exactly the right photo.
Oh, for sure. Because if you I did one of Dolores, actually, from Westworld. And nobody can see it for a reason. Because, again, we only post our successes for the most part. But so I did that, and everything was coming together. Like, the eyes that I did on her, out of all of my illustrations, were hands down my favorite eyes. But the face was so flat because there was no dramatic lighting. The nose wasn't casting a shadow on the face. There was no real bright spot. So when you flatten that out, it just looks bad. It looks like I did something wrong. Like, her face was just flat, and it's perfect to the reference, but it just didn't make for a good illustration.
So what is is there a sketching process to a photoreal illustration as well? Like, what is the first initial strokes on the paper that you're making?
So I've seen a lot of people go a lot of different ways with it. I tend to start with a very light approach of outlining everything. And then kind of working overall areas. So if I was doing my Deadpool drawing, for example, I'd get the sketch down and then I would start working his face. Deadpool is kind of a bad example for this, but I'll usually start with the eyes and the lips. If I can make the eyes and the lips look good right off the bat, then I know everything else is going to fall into place. The Pennywise drawing that I did, that's on this mid-tone paper. Once I got those eyes and that mouth really, really like popping off that page, I knew, all right, great, this is going to make for a good drawing. But if something goes wrong in that area and those eyes don't feel wet, or they don't feel like they're looking at you, or if you don't feel life or soul into them, then I will rip it up and throw it away. And if you guys think I'm kidding, I've drawn 11 from Stranger Things 3 times so far, and everyone ended up in the garbage.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's tough. Like, I am the harshest critic on myself, but I'll start working small little areas and then kind of build out from there.
Okay, so it's not like a printer that's just starting at the top and working its way down.
I have seen photorealistic illustrators who actually do that and will work it in little square sections. For me, that doesn't work. Like if I'm doing a cheek, the Venom drawing I did in Tom Hardy's cheek, I wanted to really get that value to kind of go all the way from his cheek all the way up into his forehead. And I wouldn't feel comfortable just working that in little sections because I would start to feel like I'm not blending the tones together as well. I'd feel like it is kind of compartmentalized. So where I've seen other people do that and it looks beautiful.
So what do you think, how much time do you spend on average on one of these drawings? I mean, I'm sure it varies, but it's got to be multiple days, not all in one sitting, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I have finished one drawing, I think, in one sitting, and that was the Neil deGrasse Tyson one that I did. And that's because I love my kid, but she had a birthday party with all these girls over, and they were just running around and screaming. So I just hid, and I was like, cool, I'm just going to draw this and sit and be in my own little world. And that's what I did for 8 hours. I got that one done in.
Wow.
The mid-tone paper illustrations that you see that I've done, the Pennywise, the Rocky Balboa, those ones, Neil deGrasse Tyson, for example, those ones will take me anywhere from usually 8 to 20 hours because that mid-tone paper will give you such a good starting point where you're really only bringing out your darkest points and your lightest points. Now, if I start on a all-white piece of paper like the Deadpool, the Groot, Wonder Woman, etc., those are going to take me usually anywhere from 20 to 60 hours.
Wow.
Yes. So there's definitely the time commitment.
Yeah. But so you're saying then that the paper you're actually using makes a difference in how you're accomplishing these drawings?
100%. So, for example, the Wonder Woman, I did that on a piece of paper that was extremely smooth. I mean, you run your fingers across it, no real texture or bump to it, a very little bit, but nothing major. Because one, it was a feminine woman that you're drawing.
Right.
So you don't need all of that texture or bump. Versus like the Tom Hardy Venom drawing that I did, I wanted a little bit more grit to that paper because, again, it's a lot closer up, so he's got more pores, he's got more texture and grunge to him than somebody like Gal would. So that's why I would choose that type of paper. And
what type of tools are you using to actually make the drawing then?
I use I use pencils that range from 8B, which B meaning a soft lead, so it's going to be really dark. The higher the number, the darker it's going to be, all the way down to a 5H. So the range of it goes from H to B. So think about HB being your dead middle. That's your normal yellow pencil that we all grew up using. As you move into only H's, the lead is the graphite's a harder graphite, so it's going to be much lighter. I only go down to 5. I think they go down to like 9. Anything lower than 5, I've learned for what I do, ends up starting to leave marks in the paper. Like almost, I don't want to say it tears it, but it almost like scars the paper. So as I put down light strokes and I go to erase it and take away, I still feel like I can see them. So I don't tend to go lower than a 5H for that reason. And then as you get into Bs, the softer leads, I'll only use a 2, 4, sometimes a 6, and an 8. They make, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but I don't notice too much of a difference in some of those in-betweens. So that's why I don't really get too crazy into that. So I'll use those pencils. I'll use a blending stump. I use a paintbrush as well. Just for softening areas. So like Pennywise's balloon was all me just taking a whole bunch of graphite and sandpaper and then dipping the paintbrush into the graphite and using that, kind of like painting. And then I use Posca, I think is how you say it. It's like a white paint marker. And that really pops. So in these black and white drawings that you do, if you can get that extra pop of white in the eyes especially, it can go a really long ways. So I use that, and then I have a bunch of erasers that I use because, man, I think I erase more than I draw.
So what kind of advice would you give to somebody then if they're interested in approaching the photoreal world of drawing?
Patience. Know that, hey, this is not going to be good for a while. And then, okay, this part's working. Now I'm going to start working another part. Okay, this is not good. Don't panic. Keep working the area because you can always take away from it. But you have to have a good starting point to it. You have to rough your sketches out, make sure everything proportionally is good before moving down. Because if an eye is too close to the nose, you're downhill no matter how good your illustration is.
You don't want to end up with a cross-eyed photoreal drawing.
No, absolutely not. And then also, if you're new to illustration, don't try jumping right into photoreal. Like, I put a lot of years into this before jumping into the photoreal. So, I mean, give yourself cutoffs. Give yourself, hey, I'm going to draw for 20 minutes. I'm going to set a timer. And then, hey, once that goes off, I don't care where I'm at. I'm done with this drawing. I mean, you can start digitally too, where it's not on pencil and paper if you want to. That way, you really can just kind of delete it. You can undo, you can erase easier, something to get you comfortable and feeling confident.
Would you recommend that they start on something simpler than a human face?
No, absolutely not. Actually, try the hardest first.
Okay.
Because I think it will give you an appreciation for everything. Plus, it's good to challenge yourself. It's good to fail. Failing is not a bad thing. I think we as people are so hardwired to think, oh, I failed, so, maybe I shouldn't do that. Maybe that's not for me. And I feel the exact opposite. Like, if I fail at something, good. Like, I'm glad I did because now I know what I need to work on. Now I know that I can get better at something. I can see that gap and try to bridge it. I don't look at it as in, oh, well, I guess this just isn't for me. No, absolutely not. Just keep trying, keep working harder.
That is an incredibly important thing to understand, and I 100% agree with you. And talking to my students right now, like, I would especially encourage you to think in those terms of it's okay to fail. Learning Photoshop and Illustrator, never having touched any Adobe software before, is going to be so intimidating. These programs, especially at this point, are huge, and there are features hidden in every nook and cranny of them. You're going to get frustrated. But it's okay to not know everything. It's a process, and it's taken you, Steve, years and years and years to be as good at drawing as you are now. So don't get discouraged just because you're failing or you're not understanding something.
I couldn't agree more.
All right, so stepping it back a little bit then, let's say that the motion designer who doesn't necessarily need to do photoreal drawings for their day-to-day
Which is about
work.
everybody.
What would you say, like, advice, what advice would you give to somebody who just needs to know enough to get their ideas out on paper? Like, what kind of things could you recommend or encourage us with to make our ideas, form on paper with sketching?
I think just a couple of the basics, man. Really understanding perspective, lighting, and foreshortening, how to draw in depth, is really going to kind of help elevate what's going on in your head and the quality of work you're showing. I'm not telling you to know how to necessarily break a face up, but knowing that the eyes are in the middle of your face, not towards the top, that if you cut a line down the middle of your face, the nose will go ends at where the eye starts. I mean, I could go on and on and on trying to verbally explain that it's easy to draw, but you don't necessarily need to know that. But maybe if you're doing quick little sketches, you know that the head is not round, it's more egg-shaped, more oval. So you can draw that shape and draw a center line down where the center of the face is, and then where your eye line is, just draw a line across it. And just making that almost T cross, you can show in a storyboard the direction a character is facing. Or are they looking down? Are they looking up? Is their head looking up, but they're actually looking down below them? So understanding a couple things like that, and then really knowing how framing works. Some of the more basic things, but if you take a camera and point it up at something or a person, they're going to feel very strong and powerful and intimidating because of the way that angle works. Versus if you're looking down at something, it's going to feel smaller and weaker. So if you know those little tricks early on, or how that emotion's conveyed just in framing, then you can start to kind of adapt your drawings to have those type of emotions or feelings or convey that sense.
Amazing. I love that answer. So when you're trying to come up with ideas again, and you're looking for inspiration specifically for motion design, when you're making illustrations for motion design, what kind of steps do you take to get inspired?
I love this question. So I think everybody's inspired a little bit differently, and you should look at what gets you motivated versus what gets you excited. And I know it sounds like I'm cutting hairs or splitting hairs here, but I think inspiration is only going to last long enough to get you started. It's going to get you to that start point. Inspiration is not going to get you to the finish line. And what I mean by that is any project you work on that you're truly passionate about or that means something to you is going to have this cycle of emotion. You're not going to get to that finish line without going through some ups and downs. And if you were just inspired, I don't think inspiration is enough to get you through those ups and downs, and it never has been for myself. I think if you are motivated, if mentally you're in a good spot and feeling strong about what you're creating, and you really care about the payoff at the end, that's what's going to get you all the way through. So I would say, I know it sounds dumb, but I would say what motivates you. And it's not this meme that you see on Facebook or, hey, Giant Ant just did this great piece or Steve did this, illustration that I love. Like, that's not motivating. What's motivating for me is all of that work in the middle. I love that wall that I hit in the middle of a project as much as I hate it, but I love those moments where you're like, I just want this to work. Everything should work. It's not working. How do I get through this? And then that breakthrough that happens just past that, if you keep at it, that's that feeling that I strive for and that I care about. It's like if, for those of you, like I do endurance races, but if those of you who have ever ran a 5K, a 10K, hell, if you've done an endurance race, nobody ever feels good during that. Like, you start and you're like, yeah, and then about halfway, not even halfway, you're like, I would rather do anything but this. This was an awful idea. Why did I do this? And then you hit that finish line and your feet may be tore up, you may be winded, you may have vomited along the way. I mean, you feel not good, but you feel this sense of pride and accomplishment at the end, and motivation gets you there, not inspiration. So that's why I don't know, it's kind of a thing of mine of just kind of knowing how to tackle those things within your mind first before getting deep into it.
That's awesome. And I've never heard that distinction before between inspiration and motivation, but that makes total sense, because I feel like sometimes you can say you're getting inspired by other people's, or that you've made something inspired by someone else, but you take a look at what you made and it's almost a ripoff. And so you're kind of running the risk of borrowing a little too heavily from something that you're inspired by. Whereas if you're getting motivated to make something that you like just as much as what you saw inspiration from, then you're going to come out with something original, that's something that is uniquely yours.
Man, you worded that so much better than me in a shorter period of time. That was good.
I love it. Okay, just a couple more questions then. You've given us so much amazing insight into
if it's
your
obvious,
world.
I love talking. So
we love hearing it. What about just some basic applicable tips and tricks? Like, what are some of the best tips and tricks that you've learned from drawing that you could apply to drawing for motion design?
So I would say, obviously, what we had talked about earlier, understanding lighting, shading, depth, perspective, the foreshortening, that type of stuff. But most importantly, I've touched on it a couple of times, but when you're getting into sketching and drawing, you have to give yourself a cutoff time. You have to say, per drawing I do, I'm giving 10 minutes. Here's the thing. You're not going to create something amazing in 10 minutes. And that's okay, because you're learning. In the beginning, none of us create anything that we ever really want to show people for long. Like my first demo reel, I was like, this is great. I am not amazing, but I'm doing it. Right. Looking at it now, I'm like, I'd be really happy if nobody ever even saw this. Like, this should never even exist in the world. It's painful. So knowing that, hey, when you're learning, it's okay to be bad. It's okay to not create the greatest thing ever. I think people get paralyzed in this. This has to be the best thing that I've ever done. This has to be, the best thing anybody's ever seen in the world, or better than everything else that I'm inspired by, or it has to be to that level. And sometimes it doesn't. Like, sometimes you're just going to log some hours into getting better at it, or you're just going to pick up on a small trick. Like, I do little doodles in my notepads all the time. Most of them are garbage, but every time that I do that, I've learned how to do shading smoothly with a pen. Like, that's not something that I necessarily need, but I've picked up on that little skill. I've learned how to smooth things out, show more depth just by having a circle. Like, there's little things that can really help you grow as an artist that you can just do and clocking that time in under 10 minutes. And then maybe, you hit something that you like. But the biggest thing is if you're not enjoying it, it's really easy just to start over. And once you start to get into a rhythm, it's cool. Just get rid of it. On to the next one, or make a new layer, turn the other one off, on to the next thing.
Awesome. So that you kind of seems like you'd say to even, you already mentioned this with the cutoff time, but it's basically like stay excited. Like
Yes.
if you're getting frustrated, take a break. It's okay to accept defeat for a little bit and come back to it later, even if it's the next day.
Oh, absolutely. And again, just to use the running endurance level things as analogies, if you don't run, you're not going to go try to do a marathon tomorrow usually. But if you go out and I'm going to run around the block today. Hell yeah, that's amazing. Way to get out there and start doing something you weren't comfortable with. Then maybe in a week, you're like, cool, I'm going to run around a couple blocks. And then you slowly build your way up. Illustration, animation, learning, all of that should be the exact same so you don't overwhelm yourself.
So do you have any kind of good learning resources for students that are wanting to get more into drawing and illustration?
I teach a class, so I'd plug that. For the most part, it really is just logging those hours in drawing. Start to learn how the stuff that we've talked about today is going to apply across the board. And sometimes maybe it's you just take some images on Google from movies and bring them into Photoshop and draw over them, just lightly, loosely draw over them, just to start to kind of build that muscle memory, see how things are framed you're going to pick up on. Now, I'm not telling you to take a picture from Google into Photoshop, draw over it, and claim it as your own, but do that as a learning experience. It's like learning how to play guitar, man, or drums or bass or any musical instrument. You start learning how to play other people's music and songs first, and then you can break out into your own. Drawing, you can do the exact same thing. Don't feel like you have to always start with a blank page.
Great advice. And that is also something that I can, again, relate back to my own animation career, because I used to do things like download off of YouTube. I'd rip animations off of YouTube that I liked. And I was like, I love the way that they made their text bouncy. I have no idea how that worked. And I would literally frame by frame step through in After Effects and recreate that text.
I'm so happy to hear you say that, because I used to do the same thing and nobody's ever admitted to me that they did that too, or nobody's just ever done it. So this is a great moment for myself.
Awesome. Yeah, man. Before I knew what an overshoot was, I literally had to rip other people off just to understand it. Yep. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
No,
as long as you're
not
claiming that's your work or trying to sell something, that's a great way to learn.
Yeah, no, like I said, you just made my day.
Good. Cool, man. Well, I also do want to plug your class. That was something I wanted to mention. MoGraph Mentor is a huge friend of School of Motion, and your class is one that students can just immediately have access to, right? It's not a session-based course. Correct.
You guys can do it at your own pace when you have time. And it's really targeted towards the basics, the very fundamental elements of illustration. So if you already feel super comfortable with drawing and you feel like, hey, photoreal is my next level, then that course isn't going to necessarily be something that's going to interest you. But if you're like, hey, I need to get better at doing storyboards, I need to get better at these quick sketches, these small little things, and understanding the skeleton that goes behind it all, then this course is a perfect one laid out for you.
Amazing. And we will link to that in the show notes as well. Go check that out. All right, last question. What do you wish you knew when you first started learning Adobe software?
Oh, man. Wow, that's a good one.
And I can make it a little easier on you, too. I mean, just if you can remember back to when you first opened Photoshop and Illustrator, what were the things that you were struggling with? The things that you were really frustrated with when you're trying to learn these new massive pieces of software? Is there anything that you could go back, you wish you would have told yourself, I wish I knew how to work in Photoshop this way. I wish I wouldn't have learned this bad habit or known this straight off the bat.
In the very beginning, I worked destructively. And what I mean by that is I would do everything on like 1 or 2 layers when I would draw. Kind of like if I'm drawing on paper. In Photoshop, you have this beautiful thing called layers, and you can very much work in a non-destructive way. So if you're like me and you have commitment issues, the more things you put on layers, the more you can kind of turn things off, and you can adjust your illustrations or drawings or designs a lot quicker. I didn't really pick up on that until later in the game.
again, 100% agree. I was a completely destructive, artist when I started out, and learning what smart objects were and how to use compound paths in Illustrator instead of just destructively using the Pathfinder were things I learned years and years into my career that would have saved me so much headache if I would have learned it right at the beginning.
Pathfinder is a key one that you said. Like, they have it as Shape Builder now, and I still use both, but that was a crucial thing for Illustrator.
Awesome, man. Those are great things. I'm glad that we're covering those in this course, so these students who are just starting out can have those good habits right off the bat.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, man. They'll never know how hard it is to have life without that.
Steve, thank you so much for taking time out of the day to talk to us and giving us insight into your amazing illustrations and your workflow. This has been an eye-opening conversation, just getting to hear your process. So thank you so much.
And again, thank you so much for having me. And one last thing for anybody still listening to this, reach out to me if you have questions. I am easy to get a hold of, whether it be Twitter or email. If something doesn't make sense, if you're confused by something, if you want to know the whys behind something, I'm an open book to anybody at any point if you ever need it.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. Steve basically gave you a sneak peek into the world of motion design and hopefully scratched the surface for you of how the entire production process works on a motion design piece. Coming out of this conversation, I hope that you can see just how valuable sketching can be in the creative process. You don't have to approach it from the perspective of, my drawings need to be perfect. Use drawing like a tool, just like Photoshop is a tool and Illustrator is a tool. Use drawing to get your ideas out on paper and to help you communicate an idea that you have in your head to other people. Like Steve said, if you're trying to communicate an idea in your head through your words, you're leaving it up to the other person's brain to put together the same picture. Whereas if you're drawing it out on paper, it's going to be much easier to translate your ideas to their eyes. And don't get discouraged. I love the way that Steve said that it's okay to fail. You should be happy that you failed because that shows you where you need to improve. It allows you to build a game plan to become better at whatever it is that you're struggling with. So I'd really encourage you, if you're not already, to start sketching and don't be afraid to fail. Practice really is the only way to get better at something, and you can't let yourself be discouraged by your own performance when you're starting out something new. So stick with it. Try to have fun and enjoy yourself. Thanks for listening.